Good afternoon, Facebook family. This is Daryl Powell, Dr. Daryl Powell the Sum, your cousin, your first cousin, your second cousin, your third cousin, your uncle, your great nephew, but all in all, your family. And I hope you guys are having a fantastic Monday, and I hope you guys had a fantastic weekend. I first want to apologize. I was supposed to post this on Friday, but I got caught up in just doing some things. For anyone who's a parent or a working adult, you know how that goes. So just hold it to my head and not my heart. Hope you guys are doing well. It is a beautiful day today. It's been a beautiful weekend in North Carolina. So hopefully you guys are experiencing some of the same weather and vibes that I am. I just want to do some quick housekeeping before we get started today. I got a couple of questions about from some family members about if this podcast pertains to them in reference to the relation to the Hinton family. And let me just be clear. So, you know, think about the relationship between think about how you are related to me, and then think about my mother, Daphne Powell. Everybody knows her. So the Hinton family, when I say that, don't think about the last name per se. Think about your relation to the family. So for instance, the Hinton family in this specific podcast relates directly to my mother and her mother, Nell Wilson, and then Nell Wilson's mother, Lily Mae, and then Lily Mae's mother, Inez Hinton, right? And that Inez Hinton name is where we're probably going to stop in the journey at this point in the podcast. And remember, so if you are a great niece or nephew of Inez Hinton, if you are a distant cousin, you know, that's in the tree, this probably pertains to you. And to narrow it down a little bit further, so for everybody that is in my mother's line on the Hinton side, this will include anybody who is a relative of my grandmother, Nell Wilson, whose maiden name is Nell Curse. And that means all nieces and nephews, grandchildren, obviously children. And then if you are one of the cousins who shares a grandmother with my mother, and that would be Lily Mae Kearse, you are also to be included in this podcast. And it's lots of y'all. So if you just have any questions about that, just let me know. Don't feel ashamed if you are confused or like, hey, you know, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, just to let you guys know, I'll probably be covering two sides of my mother's side. I'll be covering the Hinton side first, which was, for me, the focal point is my mother's great-grandmother, Inez Hinton, and her brothers and sisters. And we're going to track, you know, them all the way back as far as we possibly can. And then probably in season 2, I will cover the Kearse family. And that's on my mother's paternal side with her father. And so, yeah, just want to let you guys know that as some quick housekeeping. So, yeah, let's move forward. So, I told you guys in the quick teaser that this week we were going to discuss, you know, a man named Thomas Hinton. So, just historically, just know that obviously none of us are, you know, completely native to this country. We came here and arrived here via the disgusting avenue of slavery. And that does not necessarily, you know, that's not unique to our family as African Americans. But a lot of times, you know, our last names are, you know, the legacies of the memories of slavery, meaning that a lot of people that were slave owners gave their slaves their last names are surnames. And a lot of times, specifically post-slavery and post-emancipation, a lot of African Americans took the last names of their slave masters. Now, I'm not saying that this happened in the Hinton family, but I can tell you that we do have records of Hintons as slaves, and the people who owned them were Hintons. So although the Hinton family legacy is mostly black from our side, there is a legacy that does begin with that name in England. And although right now, or the research shows that there isn't like a blood relation that we have found, I think it is important to kind of go back and look at the history of the last name and how we arrived there. Does that make sense? So we're going to start in the year 1574 with a man named Thomas Hinton, and he is from southern England, in a county called Wiltshire. According to the things I've been able to find on this person, Thomas was born in a prominent family. His father was a sir, and for those who don't know what that means, in England, a sir is somebody who is knighted. And what it means to be knighted is, a sir is a Middle English rank of position that means superiority. And in a lot of cases, people become sirs in this time by being very prominent in business or in some type of culture or in law, right? So in the United Kingdom, a man becomes a sir by receiving a knighthood, which is the highest honor that can be bestowed. This title is given to men who contribute specifically to a field on a national level. So, it's kind of crazy that one of the names that we come from, we already see that the prominence of the Hinton name in 1574 was preceded by Thomas Hinton's father being Sir William Hinton. He was a landowner and a respected figure in the local community. And they were a family that were upper class. Thomas was brought up to manage land and maintain the family wealth. And then he began to kind of enter into politics. In England, at this time around 1574, this wasn't a specifically peaceful time in English history. Thomas's early years were marked by the end of Queen Elizabeth I's reign, which was a time in which there was a lot of political and religious drama, right? So, England was going through a significant transformation. And it's important to know that during this time, a lot of people did not like what was happening and they moved to America. We'll get there about how we got to America with this last name. But I just wanted to set the tone there. So Thomas grew up in an environment that was very tense, but, he had a very typical education for somebody of his political and class standing. So he was very learned in things like law and politics and philosophy, all that good stuff. And really his father, Sir William Hinton, was preparing him to, really take on the family's wealth and legacy. Just side note, for the Hinton family to have some wealth and legacy, have any of y'all seen the check? Because I haven't got my check in the mail, but we'll get there at some point as well. What's important to note is that from an early age, Thomas Hinton, was preparing obviously to be a big landowner in England. And in England, the ability to own land made you more privileged to be involved in politics. So that's where Thomas Hinton gets his initial start in life. So as we move forward, Thomas Hinton, really saw things in England for what they were, and he wanted to really become, involved in politics. So in 1604, he was elected to the English House of Commons, representing his county in Wiltshire. So this would be equivalent to him being like a state representative or a county commissioner or something like that. The House of Commons was a starting place for him politically, but it was a place where he can challenge the authority around taxes and land and law and other foreign policy. Because the Hinton family at this point was already established, his representation in the House of Commons actually allowed for the family of the Hintons to gain more prominence in Wiltshire, England. And throughout his career, Thomas served in Parliament and many times, not only in the local government, but at the national level as well. He worked hard enough to where in 1617, King James I actually knighted him. So if you want to, this ain't really nothing to brag about, but, if you just want to give a fun fact that, our family legacy, pre-slavery for our ancestors are folks that come from England, I should say. You have two people who were actually knighted by British royalty, which is probably a big deal back then. Doesn't really mean nothing to me, but yeah, that did happen. That's not something that is make believe. But he was knighted, and the Hinton family remained in the upper tiers of English society. But his role in politics wasn't always smooth. In fact, sometimes somewhere in the 1600s, there was a lot of tension between him and Parliament, and he was kicked out a few times and then got his seat back and all of that. And this just seemed like, just typical power, typical politics for the time. But as the English Civil War was somewhat approaching, that would eventually erupt in the mid 1600s. Side note, I did not know England had a civil war, so I'm gonna have to look into that. There were things that Thomas Hinton was planning beyond his life in England, specifically for his children, and we'll get there. So his life, was interesting, but I think the main highlights is that, he was from a prominent family. He was a landowner. He was very educated. His father was very educated, and he kind of, uses his life as a politician. He did marry a woman named Catherine Palmer, and they had several children. I don't know how many specifically, but I think they had about 4 or 5 children. And, this just kept the continuation of the Hinton name. They're like many marriages. She was from a prominent family, and he's from a prominent family. So obviously their political and material riches grew. So where this is going to end up, and this is kind of a teaser for episode 3 that I'm going to post next week, is Thomas Hinton has a son and eventually a grandson who play a role in coming over to North Carolina in the 1700s. So next week, we're going to talk about Thomas Hinton's son, John Hinton Sr., who leaves England in 1700 and eventually finds his way to Johnston County, North Carolina, which is where our family legacy begins. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, thank you for taking the 10 to 15 minutes out of your day to listen to just a little bit of, history about your family. And again, you could have been anywhere in the world today, but you chose the time to listen to my voice, and for that, I appreciate it. I also appreciate the response and the warm welcomes that I got from different family members about this podcast. And again, If you think this podcast is a joke and you don't want to listen to it, remember, you ain't hurting my feelings at all. I completely understand. And until I speak to you guys again, I hope you guys have a great remainder of the week, and I'll talk to you later. Peace.